Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon from London. My name is Panagiotis Panagopoulos, or Taki, as many of you know me. Welcome to the Aircraft Records virtual conference today. It is like a pre-conference webinar. The main conference will take place in September. It's scheduled for September in Dublin. Like last year, this event is taking now today place virtually. Unfortunately, we cannot meet in person. I would like to thank, first of all, the speakers for taking the time to prepare, to contribute today with their expertise and knowledge. I'm grateful for all their support. Of course, I'm grateful to the sponsors, Metal Skies, Aeromutlu, Aircamo, and APTN.aero, which is also hosting us today using Zoom. Thank you all for joining us today. Please ask questions during the presentations. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. Obviously, it cannot be a very long session. It's an event online. But please ask questions. Let's have a nice debate today. We have expert speakers participating. And any questions for me, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce you to Alan Phelan, who will chair the meeting today. Alan Phelan from APTN. Alan.
Thank you, Taki, and thank you for inviting me to moderate yet another fantastic Aircraft Records virtual seminar with Aeropodium. It's not like the real thing, as you said. We'd like to get together in person and see each other face to face and shake hands and have a coffee or a beer together. Hopefully in September that will happen, and this is a kind of a prelude to that. Anybody that's on here today gets an automatic discount from Taki for that event, as you may have seen on the various channels that we've posted it on. And this is a kind of a, I suppose, a dry run for that, and we have some interesting presentations on Aircraft Records here. We want to get your thoughts at the end of this presentation and conference with a Q&A session about Aircraft Records in general, and maybe we get some ideas from you about presentations for the event in September. But regardless, I think we have a fantastic lineup here today. We're going to hear from Dr. Jan Michael Bozak, Head of Legal at ALAFCO, on the whole business of repossessing aircraft records. We're going to hear from Patrick Honbier, who is the of Counsel, Rep Law, and Professor of International Aviation Financing and Leasing Laws. He's going to talk to us about aircraft records in connection with the laws of the Caribbean, Netherlands, in connection with foreign registered aircraft and how records are important in that respect. Following that, we have a very interesting discussion with a presentation from Nick Goodwin, who's director of NSG Aero, and is going to talk to us about the whole area of IT and digital records in MRO and how it's affected by the COVID-19 crisis too. So looking forward to that from Nick. And our final item for today will be a panel discussion chaired by myself, but we have James Carl, who was Director of Business Development at JSSI, and we're going to talk a little bit about the effect that good records and bad records have on aircraft values and what influences it. And this is where we want to get your input and your ideas on that particular aspect, but also we'll have an open panel discussion on aircraft records in general. Maybe there's some issues you'd like to raise or see addressed in one of these conferences that's not currently addressed. And yeah, finally, I'll give a couple of minutes on aircraft records and training courses that are available online for aircraft records. I'll just point you towards a couple of good providers of such services that I've come across, and we'll do that some part of the afternoon's activities. We'll also maybe just give you a quick update on APTN.aero, where we're at, and some new developments in the last couple of weeks in that regard. So without further ado, I think we'll kick off with our first presenter and speaker. Always very interesting to hear Jan Michael's view on, he's spoken to us previously on different aspects of aircraft leasing, but repossession of aircraft records, I think he has some good insights into that, and looking forward to that. Once again, Jan, I can hand over to you if that's okay.
Great. Can you see me and can you hear me all right?
I can indeed, yes.
You can see the slides.
Not yet, so just have a go there and see. Oh yeah, I see the slide right in front of me. I see a lovely long runway. Tell me where that runway is, Jan.
Yeah, I mean, I like that picture because it doesn't show aircraft, but it still does. In your imagination, that is.
So guys, we just want to mute a few speakers there. I think, yeah, we're good. We're good to go, Jan.
Great. So I'm Jan Bozak. I'm the head of legal of Alafco, a Kuwaiti-backed aircraft lessor in Dublin. And without further ado, I would like to get the presentation started. Please interrupt me whenever you have questions. First of all, I would like to share with you 5 practical lessons in terms of the repossession of aircraft records. And then I would like to finish up with a case study, a real repossession that happened in 2010.
Good.
Great.
So,
in aircraft repossessions, speed does matter. It doesn't matter what kind of equipment, whether it's engines or airframes or aircraft records. The issue is that if a creditor of a failed airline tries to secure the asset or try to collect outstanding arrears, they behave like these vultures here in the jungle. So just imagine the failed airline is like this dead zebra, this carcass, and then all competing creditors try to rip some bloody flesh off the carcass, and those who arrive first at the dead zebra get most of the nice meat. Those who come last only get the skin and the bones. And so what does that mean in practice? You should be faster than your competing creditors. So it's literally a race against time, and experienced lessors get the aircraft out relatively quickly. So I've been working on 32 repossessions, and most of our repossessions have been pulled off in 48 hours. Was there a question?
Hi, Jan. I just muted a couple more people that have come on board. You're fine.
Great. Lesson 2, get the job done without corruption. And you could say this is a no-brainer. I mean, we are all good guys, but this is the challenge. This is the corruption map of the world, or to be more precise, the map of perceived corruption in the world. And you can see most countries on Earth are brownish or reddish, and that means that they're perceived to be corrupt. So it's an issue because if you need to get your aircraft out within 24 or 48 hours, a lot of people will try to test the boundaries of the law and will try to make some money on the side. So what should you do? I mean, let's take a step back and let's say, what is corruption in the first place? And I would say the current approach to corruption and bribery is more or less US-centric. So in a nutshell, what's okay in the United States is perceived to be okay, even if some practices in the United States are questionable. For instance, is it okay to contribute to a campaign of a politician? In the United States, you can do so if you are a US citizen, or you can funnel money through a political action committee, but as a foreigner, you can't. So is it okay to contribute to the presidential campaign of a politician in, let's say, Nigeria, in order to lobby for a swift repossession of the aircraft. I would say it's questionable. That is something that I've never done. So what would you need to do in order to justify cash flows in a way that no auditor, no process auditor can criticize you? So you need to get a legal reason, or you need to create a legal reason for paying out any monies. And that means an underlying contract and an invoice. So for instance, what could you do? You could, for instance, enter into a consultancy contract where you hire a local guy who facilitates the repossession, and you are entitled, I think, to pay consultancy fees. I don't think any question marks are hovering above that. And of course, some client entertainment costs are also acceptable. The question is, where's the borderline? I mean, if you invite a politician for dinner, either directly or through a consultant, I mean, where do you draw the line? For instance, in Germany, where I had a business dinner with a politician once, the politician said, I can't accept more than 40 euros. The dish cannot be more than 40 euros. So we couldn't order the expensive bottle of champagne. It had to be relatively cheap. In other countries, there's another perception. So what you can always do is you can ask local lawyers for advice, and they can draft a compliance opinion. So in that opinion, they would opine that all the cash outflow items are acceptable and are in line with statutory law in that jurisdiction. So of course, the question is, how much is it worth if you get a compliance opinion in a rough country like Tajikistan? In the end, it may be a tick the box exercise, but I would say that you're on the safe side if you get legal opinion comfort from a law firm wherever it is located. I think that it is also helpful to enter into legal mandate letters with local lawyers on a success fee basis, so that you don't pay the lawyers, the external lawyers, by the hour, because then they would be incentivized to work on that repossession for as long as possible, but to pay them nothing at all if they fail, and to pay them a success fee if they succeed. And then it may well be that the lawyers invest money on client entertainment or other matters, but if the local lawyers do it, and if they justify the disbursements in their invoice accurately, I think that you are in the clear. What I'm saying is, there is a corrupt world out there, as you can see on this map. And what you need to do is to be very, very careful. And if in doubt, you should just ask a commercially minded lawyer to ensure that you have an invoice and a valid legal reason for any cash outflow. And all of this can be engineered relatively swiftly. You can draft a consultancy contract or an employment contract even very, very swiftly. So lesson number 3, take health warnings seriously. I mean, why is that? Because a lot of the emerging and frontier markets are rough. So the very first time I arrested an aircraft, that was an aircraft owned by Amavia in Armenia. We arrested the aircraft in France, and I wanted to travel to Yerevan in order to negotiate the lease termination of the repossession. And I was a greenhorn at that time, and my sales guy, my colleague in sales, told me, don't do that, because we hold the aircraft hostage right now, but they could hold you hostage. They could pull some political strings, and they could put you in jail for bogus reasons, and might indicate that they will release you only once you release the aircraft. So I did not take these health warnings very, very seriously until one day when we repossessed an aircraft in Tajikistan. And I got a phone call that didn't impress me that much at the time, but one line did strike me. The Russian businessman who was running the airline in Tajikistan said, don't worry, Jan, no matter what's going to happen, you are safe. And I didn't pay much attention. But later I felt like this guy in No Country for Old Men, who's about to be executed by the hitman and has to flip a coin, and he would have been executed if the coin had hit the wrong side. Because later I found out that this guy who had vouched for my safety was sentenced to death in Dubai for allegedly killing his partners. So what he did is he had 3 partners that he did create and start up airlines with, and he flew a hitman in order to kill the other 2. So the hitman approached the other 2 founders and smashed their heads in with a barbell, and then the hitman left in the private plane. At least that is what I've heard. And then the partner that I did business to fled the country just in time before he was sentenced to death for absentia. He was arrested in the Ukraine later and was meant to be deported back to Dubai. And then he made a payment under Sharia law that the widow would get some money, and that the charges would no longer be pressed. So that's a bit of story, but what does that mean? From a practical point of view, you should consider working from the safety of your office or from home. And you should think who is the best person on the ground who can take care of stuff. And these are usually local technical guys and local lawyers who know their way around rough countries and who can assess the risk and who can mediate and facilitate and negotiate on your behalf. So lesson number 4, arrest aircraft in a safe haven. So why should you try to arrest an aircraft in the home country of the airline, where most likely the owners of the airline are very influential people and can pull some strings in a courtroom or with governments? So it's so much easier to arrest aircraft in a safe haven in a neutral territory. You should have all aircraft records scanned prior to the arrest. And that is very, very important, because often everybody does focus on the repossession of the metal, or maybe on the deregistration of the aircraft, but a lot of people forget the aircraft records. So how you should plan your attack is, you focus on the possession of the aircraft, the metal, you focus on the deregistration of the aircraft, which is of little relevance here, and you need to have an attack plan for your aircraft records. So a lot of people think that electronic versions of the aircraft records are sufficient. And it's pretty anachronistic that original paper records might still be needed in some jurisdictions. And it's a hotly debated topic. So what I can say on that topic is that, as far as I know, only the Civil Aviation Authority of Austria accepts records in electronic form only, and that most of the other civil aviation authorities still expect some aircraft records to be in original form. In practical terms, that means that if you have only electronic records, but not the paper records, that you might struggle to find another lessee to take delivery of the aircraft, and you might only have the option to part out the aircraft or to sell it to a part out company. So even 10 years ago, we possessed 3 wide-body aircraft in a hostile way in China, and we only got the original aircraft records for 2 of these 3 aircraft. That is because of bribery concerns. So the entity that had control of the original aircraft records did give us the first 2, the original aircraft records for the first 2 aircraft, because they felt safe that they would be paid. But it was a pretty obvious ransom scheme. So we didn't pay for the third aircraft, and we sold all three aircraft, all three sister ships, to a part-out company, and there was no price differential. We got the same purchase price for all three aircraft, even though the aircraft records for the third aircraft were not in original form. So it's tough to get the original aircraft records, and it's I would say, one of the weakest links in a successful repossession plan. But if parting out is an option, then it's very, very important to get at least the electronic aircraft records. And how can that be done? You can have a mobile scanning team on site who would scan aircraft records immediately, every day, in real time. And sometimes airlines use third-party providers for the aircraft management. So if you can get access to that online system as part of your lease package, then you can mitigate your possession risk. And often airlines are willing to do that because you can promise them lower aircraft lease rentals. You can just explain it openly to them, and you can say, for the sake of transparency, we have a pricing model. And if we are certain that we will get electronic records at all times, then we don't have to build a credit charge in our risk model, and we can trickle this saving down to you by reducing the lease rentals. Then often airlines are very happy to facilitate this. So these were my 5 lessons on aircraft repossessions, and I would like to finish off with a case study where you can see what the timeline is and how difficult and challenging it is to pull a successful repossession of aircraft and aircraft records off. And after that, I would just like to open it to the floor for questions and queries. So this was a real repossession. The information is mostly in the public domain. I can only talk about the information that is in the public domain. It's the arrest of a Boeing 737 MSN 27267, which was on lease to Blue Air in Romania. So that's the aircraft. That is how it looked like in that livery at that time. So it was the 26th of August 2010. We knew that the aircraft would take off at Bacău Airport in Romania at 2:45 Dublin time. And we didn't terminate the leasing of the aircraft immediately. We waited for 15 minutes. We wanted to make sure that the pilot had reached the cruising speed before we terminated the leasing, because we were afraid that upon serving the termination notice, the top management of Blue Air would tell the pilot to turn around immediately. Because if you terminate a lease, if you terminate the leasing of the aircraft under the lease, it's pretty clear that the repossession is imminent. So 3 hours later at 6 p.m. Dublin time, the aircraft arrived in Beauvais in France. Scheduled time on the ground, 30 minutes. This means we had 3 hours and 30 minutes to arrange for a court order in Beauvais to be issued by a competent judge. And I mean, this is France and this is August. So it's a very, very bad combination. So it's already challenging to get a court order in such a short period of time. The court order needs to be declared enforceable by the clerk of the court in Beauvais. So a lot of more red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. The legal paperwork of the bailiff has to be executed by the competent person. The bailiff has to arrive at the airport. So you have to factor that in as well. One traffic jam, and the plan is. Pardon? What's that query? And then all enforcement measures had to be taken by the bailiff at the airport. The bailiff was afraid to put a seal on the aircraft, because that is just what it means, arresting an aircraft. It's just a sticker that is put on the door of the aircraft that says that the aircraft has been arrested and can no longer be moved. So the bailiff thought that the airport police was not sufficient to provide enough security because the passengers most likely would not be amused that they are stranded in the middle of nowhere at Beauvais, and the bailiff just wanted to make sure that there was enough police on site. So all of that has to be done in 3 hours and 30 minutes. Just imagine how much time and effort went into this in order to plan for all of this. And then it could well have been that, I mean, when we woke up on the 26th of August, 2010, we wouldn't know that it would work out, because you never know what aircraft will be used on what flight. So until 2:45 p.m. Dublin time, we didn't know for sure that this specific aircraft of ours was going to be used for the flight to Bacau, from Bacau to Beauvais. So we did uphold the fast pace. On the 2nd of September 2010, we had our injunctive repossession order. What that actually means is an arrest just means that the aircraft is grounded, that nobody can fly it, but the aircraft is neither in the possession of the airline nor in our possession. It's more or less in the possession of the French Republic. And so then you start a fight over the question, who should possess it? To whom should the aircraft be handed over? And on the 2nd of September 2010, so a couple of days later, the court said that for the time being, the aircraft should be handed over to us. Then a week later, we started the principal court proceedings on a fast-track basis. And on the 23rd of September 2010, there would have been the first court hearing, and then most likely the aircraft would have been handed over to us for good. And at that point in time, Blue Air did give up. At 9 p.m. on the same day, we settled with Blue Air. And since I felt relatively safe in Europe, I traveled there. So we negotiated on site, face to face. And Blue Air agreed to pay all of the arrears, to reimburse us for all of the legal costs. And they paid an undisclosed amount to us. That amount is not in the public domain, so I cannot disclose the significance of it, but it was a lot of money. The next day, the aircraft was deregistered, and the following day, the aircraft was back in our possession, and we flew it to safety. We did not want to keep it in Europe because of Eurocontrol liens that could have been put on the aircraft. So we wanted to ferry it to a safe haven where no competing creditors could fight us. So that was Northern Africa. And that was the case study. So I'm pretty sure that you have plenty of questions. And I understand that you will be focusing on aircraft records. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and to answering the questions as best as I can.
Yeah, and thank you very much. That was very interesting. And it's great to hear real life live examples of how aircraft records are so important in the aircraft leasing community and how you go about solving them. And I agree entirely that it's best to solve these issues the correct way and the legal way, because at the end of the day, you're trying to protect the assets that you own, and that's the best way to do it. And it was good to hear that you had a good resolution with that Blue Air aircraft as well. If there's any questions there for Jan, feel free to unmute your microphone, or you can put the question in the chat function in Zoom there as well. And I just kick it off, I suppose, in terms of the Blue Air example that you gave us there. The aircraft was eventually sold. There was no issues with records going forward. So there was nothing missing, I take it.
I mean, we reached a settlement with Blue Air.
Yeah.
So we got the original aircraft records back, and then we were able to release the aircraft again. But the problem with original aircraft records is they are usually at the headquarters of the airline, and it's the weak point of your attack, because you can plan for everything, but you cannot really get your hands on the aircraft records without getting a court order somehow in the home jurisdiction of of the airline, and that is why this corruption map of the world is so important. So that is where often you are asked for money, and that is where you need to be very, very careful to comply with the law. And it's not only about protecting the asset, it's just simple about the fact whether you go to jail or not. Even in less dramatic circumstances, if the aircraft owning entity or the leasing platform is sold, then process auditors will go through a lot of transactions, and if there is a question mark about ethical undertakings, then it has a huge impact also on the value of the entire platform. That is why this is an area where everybody should be extremely prudent, and it's unnecessary to test any waters there, because you can put contractual arrangements in place that will achieve the same result, cash flow, but that nobody can object to. I mean, I've only mentioned 4 or 5 examples. I mean, it's about creative. It's about being creative, and it's about being able to present something to your shareholders and to your top managers that is above board, where nobody would say that this is dodgy in any way. And again, the US American standards are more or less the benchmark. So if it were to be okay in the United States, it would be okay everywhere.
And just if there was digital records available in that case, would have it made the situation any easier?
Yeah, we had originally aircraft records because we had a scanning team on site.
Yeah.
And with a full set of scanned records, all you're missing are the status reports. But some airlines might still not be willing to lease the aircraft from you, because they might have issues with their civil aviation authorities. They might prefer to lease aircraft from the competitor if the competitor has a full set of original aircraft records. That is why the marketing of the aircraft to leasing prospects is much more challenging. And then the easy way out is often to sell it to a part-out entity, in particular because the aircraft that are put into very challenging jurisdictions are mostly of old vintage anyway.
Okay, good. We have one question from Evgeny Shuravin, and he says, thank you, Jan. Wonder if there are any chance to restore missed or lost docks in case of no other option for repossession available.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, he says, wonder, is there any chance to restore missed or lost documentation in case of no other option for repossession available? In other words, if there is some documents missing, can you reproduce them? Can you recreate them? Have you come across that scenario at all?
Yes, so that is often very challenging, and it's difficult to give a definitive answer. It comes down to the details, and you have to determine on a case-by-case basis what documents are important and what documents can be recreated. So what I've seen in the market is that sometimes employees of the failed airline are hired, either directly as employees or as consultants, and then they help with the technical records. And if you hire, for instance, a previous quality officer of the technical team of the failed airline, then often these problems just go away. They just melt because these documents then are then just found because these guys know exactly how the inner workings of the failed airline worked, and they know who to talk to, and they know what needs to be done. And I have no ethical constraints, and I don't see any legal issues, any legal compliance issues if you hire an employee of the failed airline straight away on the site, exactly immediately, a couple of hours after the airline has officially defaulted.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, Alan, can I put in a shout for Blue Air? By the way,
go ahead, Nick. Yes.
Yeah, I've seen this example a few times, and it was a pretty turbulent time for Blue Air at the time. They ran out of cash very, very quickly. But I've had a relationship with Iridium Babet now for about 12 years. He's now the chief technical officer, and the airline is now effectively on its third legal identity and ownership structure since that incident that Jan Michael was raising. And I will say that they take technical records very seriously, and they take the use of systems like Oasis extremely seriously. So yeah, good things can come out of very bad moments like that. So just wanted to shout for them because they're a pretty decent bunch of people from my experience.
Very good. All right, good. We have a hand up from Francisco. Do you want to unmute and ask a question, Francisco?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Congratulations on your success with that returning that aircraft. Question is, the 3-hour period, that transaction, what are the key factors in obtaining a successful court order to arrest the aircraft in such a short time? Having the right documents, having the right lawyer, having the right jurisdiction. I noticed you took the aircraft to a small airport. You didn't take it to Paris, for example. That would have changed your jurisdiction. What do you think? I'm sure it's a combination of all of these things, but what was the key driving element?
Yes, I mean, guess how much time we spent on this? Guess how much time we prepared for this repossession?
No, how much?
Yeah, have a guess.
I'll put a guess. 1 week. 1 week.
A month?
No, we spent 2 to 3 months on this.
Okay.
So we had prepared everything, and I mean, it could have gone bad, and then we would have needed to fight for another day. But it's all about planning. If you have a good playbook, and if you stick to the playbook, and but if you are flexible enough to deal with unforeseen circumstances, then you have a decent chance. But you will never have a guarantee that you will be able to pull it off. So you should never overpromise. You should always underpromise and overdeliver.
So you had good organization of the documents, and you probably had good lawyers. Now, what the jurisdiction where you took the aircraft to, again, versus Paris or somewhere else, how was that decision made?
We didn't have much choice because there were not that many friendly jurisdictions that Blue Air flew to. And France is one of the most friendly jurisdictions for aircraft arrests that I know, because we have pulled it up multiple times to arrest aircraft on a very, very short time frame, or in a very short time frame.
Very good. Thank you, Jan, for that. Thank you, Francisco, for the interesting insight. Before we move on to our next speaker, I wanted to mention a couple of the sponsors of today's event with Aeropodium. First of all, a very regular participant on these calls is Cengiz Mutlu from Aero Mutlu Aviation Services. Cengiz, do you want to say a few words before we go to the next presentation?
Hi, everybody. I'm Cengiz Mutlu from Aero Mutlu Aviation Services, and I'm happy to support these events. Unfortunately, still since last 1.5 to 2 years, only in virtual, but I'm pretty sure that we will meet again in person in the next time, I think end of the year. And I wish a good session today, and thank you very much for all. And I think I will not be attended until the end of the session, because I need to go to Köln now within the next half an hour. Thank you very much, but I will try to hear you from my mobile.
Thank you, Cengiz. Thanks for the support again. Okay, on that note, we'll move on to our next speaker. So,
Alan, may I, before you start, is Jan still there? I would like, I think for everybody, an interesting development the other day in the UK about the choice, a lessor, financier, whoever has a choice. Do I go to court or do I repossess, as Jan suggested? There was a really important court ruling, well, not 2 months ago. Can I make a comment on that? Because otherwise you will take away of my speaking time.
no, that would be fine. I'd love to hear what is the court ruling and what does it relate to?
Okay, listen, because as I say, an aircraft lessor or a financier, stakeholder has a choice, right? It can say, okay, shall we go to court or shall we not go to court? And shall we repossess the aircraft and the records orchestrated as Jan is suggested, a plan? That choice you can make, right? Now, as far as the first scenario is concerned, are we going to court? Well, in many transactions, lease, and particularly the ones having a connection with Asia, in a lease agreement or finance agreement, they will have made a choice for English law and jurisdiction court, right? I think most of us realize that it is not only in aviation circles, international. Okay, so what happened now? You think, okay, let's go to court in London, as the agreement says, and apply English law, right? Now, okay, that is what happened in the case of lessor against SpiceJet India, the airline from India. They went to court 1.5 years, right? A case pending 1.5 years. And I'm sure you will agree, Alan, and other people, that London is not a cheap place to be or go to court, etc. I'm sure most people will agree. So the lessor went to court 1.5 years. What did the court say? You know what? I think the two of you should now start mediation. So I don't think any aircraft financier lessor is waiting for that, having spent all that money and time, and then a court ordering, you two go for mediation. Now, of course, the lessee, SpiceJet, was very happy. It didn't pay in the first place. And now it, again, doesn't have to pay until, you get my point? And I'm sure that John would agree with me.
Yeah, all right.
And that was reasoned.
Yeah. So, okay, so I'd like, just conscious of time, I'd like to move on to your own presentation now, Jan, and it's in relation to repossession of aircraft and records with reference to the Dutch Caribbean. So let me just pull up your presentation and get it up on the screen here. Just 1 second.
Okay, shall I already start in the meantime?
Yeah,
well, thank you, Taki, for inviting me. And also you are most kind, Alan, as always, to turn the slides, because I am not able to do so, unfortunately. So, and welcome everybody. Indeed, as Alan was so kind to say, my presentation is called, particularly now, Corona affirms that the laws of the Caribbean parts of the Netherlands are needed to repossess risky foreign registered aircraft and their records. Jan has been telling us already that, yeah, as you know this, an aircraft, repossessing it is one thing which is very much necessary in certain cases, but also you need to have the records Otherwise, the value of the aircraft will be much less than normal. And therefore, you should orchestrate in such a manner the repossession of the aircraft. And as I just mentioned, not go to court for nothing for a year and a half. You should do as Jan tried to explain to you, but orchestrate it so you have got both the aircraft and the records. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please?
Okay, 1 second now. I just want to get onto a different screen here. Share screen. There we go. All right.
Anyway, this is a little thing about me. Alan already informed you who I am. I would like to point out, however, one thing, that is that, as Alan said, I am an international aviation finance and lease professor at the University of Mississippi. And I am very happy to say that the institution is the only academic one that is providing for this course. It provides for a variety of aviation courses, like a few others do, only 2, by the way, others do, but this course only, and I would like to mention it, it is online possible already for 7 years, not just because of COVID. And secondly, it is not only for lawyers, also non-lawyers who are interested in whatever is going to be mentioned today from a legal point of view. You could approach me if you're interested, and then you can take that particular course. Thank you, Ellen. Next page, please. I would like to focus today on a certain case, and that case has also to do with India. Nevertheless, the difference is that it doesn't concern a commercially operated aircraft. No, as you can see on the slide, it concerns a private aircraft, a corporate aircraft. But the difference is minimal, if at all. You want to repossess the aircraft and the records. And also in this case, it was an orchestrated repossession of the corporate aircraft and the records, right? Okay, it concerns a Bombardier. You can see motor serial number. However, registration India VTRAK. Well, I can already tell you that what is now important, not only getting possession, as Jan said, very important, and of the aircraft and the records, but you also need to obtain, the deregistration of that aircraft in the original country of registration, in this case, India, and in Jan's case, Romania. You can mention, I don't know how many other cases. That is also a great necessity, because if you do not obtain the deregistration, like in this case, in India, your aircraft is basically not only less valuable, no, it is basically worthless because nobody wants it. You cannot, in essence, register it in any other country. Well, it didn't really work good or not at all, because I can say already, aircraft was taken out of India in 2010, orchestrated, logbooks, records. And since 2010, it is grounded at Biggin Hill Airport in area London, UK. So that is important, and I'm going to focus on that part that Jan also mentioned, registration, deregistration. Next, please. What happened in this case? And again, the same in a commercial airliner, whatever, doesn't matter. Now, that concerned the following. You had in Ireland a lessor called Peel, and it leased this aircraft to Golden Wings, the lessee in India. In 2008, However, Peel, lessor, needed money to purchase that aircraft. That happens all the time. People focus a lot on lessor-lessee situation, but no, you also need, as a lessor, money to purchase that certain airplane. You can imagine. Therefore, yeah, there was a loan agreement, and Peel got a loan to purchase the aircraft, which was about $14 million from corporate aircraft funding in the United States to purchase that aircraft. And in return, it gave the bank a mortgage, an English mortgage in that aircraft, $14 million US. Now, both the lessor and lessee had no money. In 2010, defaulted both under lease and mortgage agreements. So the bank got worried and upset. You can imagine. Now, aircraft, they took it out, similarly to what Jan suggested, to a safe haven, allegedly, that was the United Kingdom, London. And it is, as I said, at Biggin Hill Airport since July. All right. So England, UK, may be a safe haven normally, but the problem is, until today, that the Department of Civil Aviation of India refuses to deregister that aircraft. It doesn't do so. It asks for $2.5 million, roughly. Otherwise, it will not deregister that aircraft. And for that very region, the owner who went bankrupt, or I'll look into that later, the lessor went bankrupt, but the bank doesn't get its money. It is displeased, you can imagine. And why did allegedly, what are we told, the Department of Civil Aviation of India say, yeah, there was a tax fraud locally in India, the operator, people involved, they didn't pay 2.5 million taxes and we wanted, but what does the bank say in the United States? Yeah, what have I got to do with that? I am not fraudulent. So why can I not get my aircraft deregistered so I can sell it or lease it out, whatever I want to do? Consequently, that aircraft grounded for 11 years. Okay, so what do you do to solve this today? See, these kind of cases, you already have your records, you already have your aircraft, but then you're faced with this issue. Can we go next slide, Alan, please? Now, what happened in India? In 2013, there were 2 court cases. And in the first court case, the judge said very, very accurately and satisfactorily, you must, Department of Civil Aviation, deregister that aircraft. However, the India government went into appeal, and the second court ignored all applicable laws. It didn't even rule on it. It couldn't care less, apparently. And it just said to the Department of Civil Aviation, you know what, you must within, I think, 3 months, you must deregister that aircraft or come up with something else, a reason why not to do so. Well, until today, as I mentioned already several times, DCA India is refusing. Okay. What happened next in this case? In this tragedy, in 2019, April, so now 2 years ago, the Irish lessor went bankrupt. The Irish lessor went bankrupt. The court in Ireland said, okay, finish this lessor, and we appoint a liquidator in Ireland. And in fact, that liquidator is KPMG, the tax well, everybody knows KPMG, one of the most famous tax lawyers, etc., in the world firms. Now, however, until today, that liquidator can do nothing with that aircraft. First of all, there are no other assets in the bankruptcy estate besides the asset, the aircraft, and the records. Let's assume everything is there. That is nice, but it can do nothing with it because nobody wants that aircraft without deregistration in India. So that is the problem until today. Next slide, please, Alan. What does international regulations, treaties say about this, about deregistration of aircraft? The third element, possession in a friendly country, but also records, deregistration, registration. What does it say? Now, most people, hopefully today, will know that there exists a convention called Chicago Convention, the Convention on International Civil Aviation. That's basically the blueprint of aviation and aviation law. That is basically the blueprint. And this treaty says about registration that an aircraft like this one or any other one can only be validly registered in one state, not in more states than one validly. Because this means that if you have an issue about registration or deregistration, you must wonder, where is it validly registered? It can be, like in India, possibly invalidly registered, or in some other countries, more countries, invalidly registered, but that doesn't matter. You need to find out, is it still registered validly in India, or is it no longer validly registered in India? And if it is no longer validly registered in India, then you can register it somewhere else. And then you can lease out your aircraft or sell it. You understand? But that's the problem. You have to research, look at the laws. Is it valid in one country or India or not in this case? Now, also this convention says you can transfer, you can change the registration, but that is only regulated, not by this treaty, but only regulated by the country involved, right? Registration, India, the Netherlands, UK, Ireland, Russia, any country is having its own registration laws and also deregistration laws, because the problem is that the Chicago Convention doesn't say anything about deregistration, the issue I am addressing. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything about registration, but it at least says, yeah, you must register and you can change. But how to deregister or how to register, how do you do that? What's the procedure legally? Up to any state. And for that very reason, every country has its own registration, deregistration laws, and some are great, and the other ones are pure, terrible, terrible, lousy. Like in my book, the ones in India. And all of you, and certainly people from India, this is not India bashing, it just happens that India is a bit notorious because there are several cases, not only the one I'm talking about, but one more pending right now, including in Boeing 777 parked at Amsterdam Airport, I think until today, already for a year, 2 years, most likely, and others, pending cases. So it is just, I take this as the most grave example. Now, there is no deregistration in rule in this treaty. So each state has its own, but not if there is another treaty that does have such a mandatory, obligatory deregistration regime. So the question is now, is there such a treaty? Next slide, please. Alan? Well, I already say, yes, there is such a treaty. The treaty is, hopefully, you know, called the Cape Town Convention, which was realized in 2001. 2001, and already 70 on the slide, it says 79 states and the European Union have adopted this treaty. I can only add briefly that after I submitted my presentation last week, another state joined, Kyrgyzstan, one of the old Soviet republics in the area, Tajikistan, etc. Uzbekistan in that area has joined, so it is already 80 states have adopted this treaty, so it is popular, and in all those 80 states, this deregistration regime applies, in essence, okay? A uniform regime, it applies. Can we go to the next slide, Alan? What does it say now? Because the countries involved in this case, India, the Ireland and the United Kingdom, they all, and also my country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, among the others, have adopted this treaty, so it applies in India, etc. Now, this treaty says that it is possible that the debtor here, the lessee, the operator, the Indian operator of the corporate aircraft, issues what we call, or legally is called, a deregistration export request authorization. IDERA, we call that in practice. And that has been issued by the lessee, which is now, which went bankrupt a long time ago and couldn't pay anymore. That has been issued and it has been deposited at the Department of Civil Aviation of India properly. So that implies that DCA India has no discretion at all not to deregister this or any other aircraft when the holder of that IDERA asks for it. As soon as the lessor, which is now also bankrupt in this case, but now in this case, the bank in the United States, corporate aircraft funding, as soon as it asks India in 2010 that Department of Civil Aviation should have deregistered that aircraft, but they just didn't do it until today. And that is a no-no you can imagine. That's a no-no. Now, in my opinion, and certainly in my country, that is a tort. It is an unlawful act. If any party, it doesn't matter, a governmental entity or a private entity, a corporation or whoever, if you do not do something that the law explicitly tells you to do, then you commit a tort. And that means you are liable for the damages of the party that is damaged. Corporate aircraft funding here. But so far, nobody went to court in India because that will obviously be hopeless and you can forget it. But in any event, if you were to go to court in my country, I think I would advise my client do it because there will be a high rate of success that you get at least your damages, you get paid, you get money. Now, in any event, what is now important here to say is that certain aircraft, that Indian corporate aircraft funding aircraft, that is no longer validly registered in India. Whether DCA India says, yeah, well, it is still in our books or not, well, that is up to India. That is internal issue. They can do what they want, apparently, and not obey international treaties, which they have ratified. Yeah, if that's what they want to do. But the rest of the world should not be, yeah, blackmailed, whatever you call it. Give me $2.5 million for whatever reason. Otherwise, we won't deregister. And Jan has mentioned very excessive cases, which I also know from my practice. It can be dangerous, etc., to do things. Now, yeah, anyway, there is no double in the registration now. In the event that the bank, the holder of that IDERA, if it would go and register in another country, because it's no longer valid in India, the registration. That is for sure. Next page, please. So what do you do, ladies and gentlemen? In my country, the Netherlands, which includes a part in the Caribbean, 3 territorial units, they are islands opposite Venezuela, and one of them in particular, there is applicable, that treaty, the Cape Town Convention, is applicable in that part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So what you can do is very simply, or the bankruptcy receiver in Ireland could have done since 2020, a year ago, April 1st, it could have followed the Netherlands, Caribbean Netherlands route in the following way, because what is the new law applicable since April 1st, 2020? What does it say if you want to register an aircraft, any aircraft in the Netherlands, including the Caribbean part, which is the same, okay? It says, if you import an aircraft in the Netherlands, you must submit proof that the aircraft is no longer registered abroad, India. And normally they do that because you get a certificate of deregistration from the original country of registration, but in this case, a hostile Department of Civil Aviation, so you don't get it. Now, so this doesn't work. You can't submit a certificate from India that it has been deregistered, and now it comes that is new, or the aircraft must be deregistered from a foreign registry under that Cape Town Convention treaty. And that is novel. And then third, the authorized party, the bank in this case, must have asked duly India to deregister, which is refused. And that is what happened here. Now, and one more requirement, and that is that you have to create a special purpose vehicle, a corporation. That's done very simply in that entity of the Kingdom of the Netherlands where the Cape Town Convention applies. And then you can successfully apply for registration in the Netherlands. Okay, you get the flag of the Netherlands, right? And subsequently, you do that temporarily. And then subsequently, you can lease it out again or sell it to another party. And this is unique. No other country in the world has this kind of implementation of that Cape Town Convention, organized, finalized, realized, or even thought about yet. So that's why I bring it up. Only this country provides for a solution for difficult cases, even in the event that you have the aircraft in a safe haven, England, and you have got the records, England, or electronic records. You have got electronic records, Jan explained that. But then you can register, you get a flag and can lease it out. Keep in mind that this does not in other territorial units in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So don't go to Aruba, don't go to Curacao or other islands which belong to the kingdom, because unfortunately history shows that you get big trouble, and I don't want you to have big trouble. Next, Jan, please, I'm almost there. Sorry, Alan, please. Now, practical consequences, you temporarily register, you can lease it anywhere else in the world. In essence, that's it. No other country is providing for a solution like that. One more slide, please. Yeah, and as I said, experience has learned since this is working, this law, that stakeholders, they heard of it and they inquired, they got information from law firms in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but unfortunately, apparently not the right ones. This meant for a great disappointment for them. So be careful what you do. My firm is the only one in the entire Kingdom of the Netherlands that exclusively focuses on aviation and certainly on this area of law, because we have been advising the government of my country. And finally, I would like to mention that my government did not create a vague law. No, no, no. We've been working on this for 5 years. The government has been we have been legal counsel for the government. Government has been talking to ICAO, to other countries like Canada about this. So it is not just an invention which has no merits. And that is what I would like to say. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, all right. Patrick, I should say thank you very much for this very unique and innovative solution you have there to get difficult aircraft problems resolved. And you know, despite difficulties with aircraft records, there are solutions out there for situations like that. Have we got any questions for the audience for Patrick on that? I see Nick is unmuted. Have you got some observation, Nick? Usually have a good insight into these things.
I was just curious why Bonaire and not Curacao, Saint Martin, and the other Dutch Antilles places. Is there a particular reason why?
Yes, Bonaire is, but Aruba is not, and Curacao is not, and Saint Martin is not. And the reason is constitutional. It is like the UK. The UK has all these crown dependencies all over the place, and one has this regulation, and one is totally independent, and another is not. And that is the same with these other islands. They are not a part. They are part of the kingdom, but not a part of the Netherlands. Yes.
They come under the jurisdiction of the
they have their
Aviation Authority. Right.
Exactly. They have their own flag for aircraft. They have their own government. They have their own money. They are not the Netherlands. You see. So, but maybe what is why you may wonder: have there any been successful cases already? Right, within that last year? Well, I can tell you that first of all, lessors and banks are very reluctant to repossess, you will agree, because if they do, what are they going to do with that aircraft? And secondly, they have to pay for all the expenses like parking fees, insurances, and so on and so on. So in essence, the last year, they didn't like it much to do so. However, now, as I just mentioned, the English court cases, they are getting ready, but that is now, we have applications to do so, but the problem is, how do you get your aircraft out? How do you get your aircraft and records out of India, for example? And if you have 2 aircraft in India or 3 at the same time, how do you get them out of India? Because you already know that the DCA in India likely will not be happy and pleased. That is something practical. So if you, Nick, or whoever, Jan, has any suggestions how to get aircraft and records out, secretly scenarios, please give me a call.
Are you saying this solution really isn't worth anything without the records?
Sorry, Alan, sorry.
Are you saying this solution with the Dutch Caribbean to re-register the aircraft is not really of any benefit without the records?
You must always have records. You always must have records, electronic or not, or original ones. And as I said, this case was one orchestrated with original records, and other cases I know also. But still, like for Thailand one was downgraded, my case in the US for I think 6 years because the ties didn't work. So the records were there. And my point is, records, having them, is not the final stop of all the time, and certainly not arresting them outside a problem state like Egypt, Thailand. In my practice, all these, you know the countries very well. They're very risky countries. Or Russia is not easy either, to be honest. Or Ukraine, to be honest.
I think, in any end, basically the bottom line is
you need to go a step further.
The aircraft, without the records, regardless of what registration it's on, is useless.
It can be useless. I just showed this to you, and I can mention more cases. But this is the longest case in the history of aviation that you have everything, aircraft, engines, and records, absolutely necessity. But then you need to go a step further, and going to court doesn't make any sense. I just told you about the last case in England. It is a total mess.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Patrick. Actually, we have one question from Brian Fieldcorn. And Brian says, thank you, Patrick. Very interesting topic. In the case you spoke about, it is a very real situation that you would not want to fly this aircraft to India again, as it could be held hostage. Is that correct?
You can believe so, but who wants to do business at all if you have had such an experience, whether you're a commercial lessor or a private aircraft lessor? I would think 3 times. They already think 3 times. Let me think. If the authorities in India will not be pleased, and that will be a court case. But I'm sure there are other countries where you can get rid of your aircraft than India.
So long as you have the records, okay?
Well.
All right, thanks very much for that, Patrick. Any other questions before we move on to the next part of the proceedings this afternoon? Okay, so what I'm going to just introduce one of the other sponsors, first of all, before I give you a couple of minutes about APTN and aircraft records training options that are out there. So I think we have Paul from Air Camo on here at the moment. Paul, do you want to say a few words, or do you want to leave it till the end, or just let me know? Just have a look, see, is he still there? Or we have Metin Skies also as a sponsor. Have we got anybody from Metin Skies on today? All right, doesn't look like it. So I am going to move on, and it's not on the agenda, but just we have a few minutes before our next speaker at 3:30. And I just want to share a couple of screens with you on aptn.aero and on aircraft records training. So just bear with me for 1 second, and I'll start with the first screen. So, so here you should see, I know it's a little bit busy, but it is a screenshot of the database, the aptn.aero database, which shows that we currently have 815 members of aptn.aero on our platform in over 101 countries, and they are spread right around the world, as you can see there on the left-hand side, and there are, like say, 101 countries represented worldwide. Expertise types ranging from airframe to avionics to borescope, and all very important aircraft technical records. We have 343 members in the network that have experience in aircraft technical records. So if you're looking for somebody in aircraft technical records or you need help, use the network to help each other. That's the whole purpose of APTN.aero. We have various platforms to communicate with members. We have regional WhatsApp groups. We have one for Asia, which is very, very active, one for Africa, one for Europe, and one for the Americas. So members are able to communicate with each other with those regional WhatsApp groups. We also have our APTN Hub LinkedIn group for members and others to correspond on topics of interest and areas of common interest, as I said. Aircraft type that are covered, you can see there, bulk of them Boeing and Airbus, and across all of the commercial aircraft field, and some regional and private jets there as well. Engine types covered across the membership, GE, CFM, IAE, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce. And yeah, that's just a good quick overview of the current membership at APTN. So I'll try and share a couple of other screens on APTN before I get into the aircraft records options that are available to you. So that's the homepage of APTN.aero. Like I said, it says 700 there, but like I said, things have been moving fast the last couple of months. So we're over 815, 20 members now in 101, 102 countries. We've updated the platform, which I'll show you in a second, to include new search functionality, and a continuous professional development menu structure is changed. And that's what I'm going to talk to you in terms of aircraft records now in a minute. So yeah, it's basically what APTN.aero, it is a network to provide networking opportunities, and also where aircraft technical professionals can display their availability and their skills worldwide, especially to our APTN.aero enterprise members, who are primarily aircraft leasing companies, airlines, MROs, who get access to the database and can search for this expertise and skills that they need. So yeah, that's the homepage. Services, we have a calendar app, we have technical workshops, both online and hopefully starting in Dublin again in September, October. Continuous professional development is what I'm going to talk about now in terms of courses that are available in the area of aircraft technical records. So let me see now, I just want to, maybe I can stay on this screen and I can just switch to, yep, that did it there. So hopefully there you can see a page inside of the APTN platform, and the menu structure is down the left-hand side. You can see the calendar tool. You can see a search tool for parts and price and ADs. Continuous professional development, we'll talk about in a second. But the home screen here, I just wanted to show you that you can search by expertise, by country, by expertise type. So if I go looking for tech records guys in, let's say, the UK, yeah, we have 29 guys in there that have aircraft tech records experience, and you can search in there by the individual. You can see what skills they have. You can click into their LinkedIn profile to see what other background they have, and you can contact them directly. So it's a very useful tool for the enterprise members to be able to search for people in different skill sets that they need. So yeah, that's the search functionality that I mentioned. Continuous professional development. That's the reason I just want to spend a few minutes speaking about, you know, what we're doing here on this platform. It's an independent platform for aircraft technical professionals. And on the continuous professional development side of things, we offer courses online, webinars, technical workshops, and other resources to the members to help them upskill, keep in touch with their expertise type, and keep up to date on it. So we have some partnerships with different training organizations, and in here you can see, you know, Sofima, Boston Air, Limerick Institute of Technology. There are various courses that are available to members there. You deal directly with the organization. We're not trying to sell you our courses, or we're trying to provide you with a shortcut to good aircraft technical resources and courses that are out there. And in terms of aircraft records, I'm just going to mention two now to you this afternoon. You may be familiar with them, you may not. There are only two of several that are out there, but I think they're quite useful. I'm not going to say I'm biased because they're based in Ireland, but there is a lot of, as you know, aircraft technical resources based in Ireland that surround the aircraft leasing community, and they've kind of evolved around that. So that's the only reason they're kind of based here in Ireland. And like I said, they do provide online courses. That's the key here. With aptn.aero, we're trying to, you know, provide resources worldwide in the regions to leasing companies, to MROs, to airlines, and training can be done, you know, online. As we know, during COVID, it became more and more popular, and these courses here are ones that you may be interested in. The first one I'll mention is from a company called IALTA, International Aircraft Leasing Training Association, and they have a range of courses surrounding the whole area of technical lease management. But for our talk here today in particular, they have this particular technical records course, which is part of their program. And if you're a member of aptn.aero, you will get a discount on their sticker price. You can contact me about that. But I think it gives a good overview. I'm not going to bore you with the video there. You can check it out yourselves. But even if you scroll down here to the type of stuff they're looking at, technical lease planning, lease return condition review and understanding, downloading toolkits they provide on site, aircraft status, components, aircraft records review. So they're all the type of modules they cover, which I think is very, very interesting and useful. And at the end of the day, you'll get a certificate of competence saying what particular module you did, if you did all the modules or one of them or whichever. But that's one aircraft records course that I would recommend. I think that's what I just showed you. The second one I'm going to mention is one also provided out of the Shannon region in Ireland, and it is provided by a company called Atlantic Air Ventures. So they provide aircraft technical resource courses in partnership with Limerick Institute of Technology, and they also have, as you can see here from the screen, courses in Part 21 design, CAMO, certificate in aviation, but the one I'm focusing in on here today is the certificate in aircraft records, and that is this particular, I'm just looking to see that it comes up okay, yeah. I think it's a 10-week course and it's online, it's available online. The next one, this is the page from the one in February, but I believe there's another one starting in September, and it tells you here what the entry requirements are. Tells you, you know, a bit more about the module, the modules that you'll study. So here you're talking about contracts, lease transition checklists, maintenance program planning, CAMO, landing gears and engines, structural repair, all that type of stuff is covered in their aircraft records course. So check it out. And like I said, there is a discount available to APTN members for any of these courses that that you decide to partake in. And as I come across more, I'll be advising the members of what's out there and what's available. But that's it from my side. That's the APTN update. The last thing I'll just mention is that we recently hired a new marketing assistant, Claudine Moore, who will be in touch with members with some new developments and initiatives that we're taking on board. You'll see some correspondence on that if you're part of the APTN network on either LinkedIn or on the platform itself. So feel free to join. Membership for 2021 is free for ATP members up till the end of July. And there's more information on membership fees on the website, as you can see here. So on that note, I will call out to our sponsors again, Air Camo Paul, if he's there. So, and Mitten Skies, another very frequent sponsor of the Aeropodium events. If they're there, they're welcome to join in for a minute before we hear from our next speaker. Okay, so just bang on time, 3:30. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Nick Goodwin is director of NSG Aero, and he is a consummate professional in the whole area of IT in relation to aviation and aviation MRO. And I'd like to ask Nick to take the reins now for this part of today's discussion.
Okay, Alan, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Can indeed.
Okay. Right. I'd like to thank Taki and yourself, Alan, for this opportunity to speak. What I'll share with you is kind of a personal retrospective of the last 15 months since the COVID crisis started, and how that might apply to decisions in the future. You can see behind me some relics from my past. I'll tell you a little bit about my past experience in a second, but I want to particularly draw out attention to the Avro RJ100 and the beautiful Chelsea Rose livery on it. Right. Are you now seeing my screen?
We can see the screen, Nick. Yeah, that's fine. It's just it's not in the screen share mode yet, or the screen, or if you can manage that, I can see. Yep, there we go. Excellent.
Okay. All right. Okay. Let me let's change the view here slightly.
So we're seeing the full screen there at the moment, which is great.
Okay. Right. Look. Yeah, I was seeing all the participants in the side panel. I just had to minimize that. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. So this is my first presentation as NSG Aero, and who is NSG Aero? Well, it's basically me, but that might grow in the future to other associates. And I have a pretty reasonable background in a number of areas in aviation, so it's been quite interesting to see what has been happening in the COVID-19 crisis, and in particular the way that the general media reports aviation. It seems to be miraculous that they believe everyone can start tomorrow and make money tomorrow when they've got aircraft sitting around. But let's just share a few of the slides here as we go through. So, in terms of my own NSG Aero service history, I've got through aviation life, largely without any significant emergency airworthiness directives or groundings. But I spent most of my initial life in regional airline marketing, both from a point of view of sales engineering, technical selling, market communications, and senior management. And that included not just the tail end of the BAC 111 program at Weybridge, the launch of the original 146, but significantly in Prestwick with the Jetstream 31, and then latterly 41 regional airliners. I was a board member of Jetstream Aircraft Limited, and as such was part of the team that negotiated the joint venture with ATR in Toulouse called AIR. And I also spent significant time in Washington, DC at the peak of the Jetstream 31 sales success in stiff competition, I have to say, with two worthy American adversaries, the Fairchild Metro and the Beech 1900. So I learned all about what makes business tick, the value proposition, particularly in the USA. But my initial grounding was really in aircraft airworthiness performance, operating economics, market stimulation through frequency, all those kind of factors. I then had 5 years roughly in decision support systems and the early phases of electronic tech logs, at Rolls-Royce Data Systems and Solutions. So not only did they do those things, but they did electronic engine health monitoring, other health monitoring and decision support systems, including OEM portals for data gathering, and of course, electronic tech logs. And I served also as an elected board member, three times elected to the European Regional Airlines Association. So I felt reasonably well grounded and was privileged to be headhunted to about 13 years ago become business development director, and then for most of the time managing director at the Comsoft Oasis. My experience in helping negotiate mergers and acquisitions when I was at Jetstream with ATR came into hand when the owners of Comsoft sold it to Valsoft Corporation of Canada back in 2019. And I served as MD in the transition phase, and for the last year did sales consultancy to them, and that ended in March of this year. So in that time, that transition time corresponded with some fairly significant times in the industry with the COVID-19 crisis. In terms of COVID-19 and aviation, the headline impacts are fairly clear. I would really recommend, as a member of ISTAT, that people take a look at the ISTAT Learning Lab facilities on their website. There have been some amazing presentations by Airbus, Embraer and Boeing on the market outlook as late as the last month. Several lessors are presented there, and many others who are interested in aviation finance and the whole aspect of aircraft trading. And then also Cirium has put out some incredible analysis. So you don't need me to repeat what's happened in the industry, but suffice it to say there have been major reductions in operations. I think the last figures I saw suggested that narrow body fleets were now about 70% of the fleet were now flying, but they're flying at lower utilizations than they did before, flying something like 55, 60% of flights, and with much lower passenger loads and also revenue impact. So I'm guessing the airline business is only seeing, in many cases, somewhere around 25 to 30% of the revenues that they were seeing pre-COVID. And then lay on top of that, I still believe it's a big mistake, Brexit. So from, as somebody who lives in the UK, seeing the impact on operations with the national authority, the UK CAA, and now no longer being a member of EASA, a lot of these factors drive some of the software changes that are required in the industry. There's also been a clear focus on newer generation aircraft, and most of those come with greater data generation in their own right. And one of the challenges of the industry in terms of records is that the OEMs, the original equipment suppliers, Boeing and Airbus, really want to muscle in on the getting the value out of that data, mainly from themselves when working with vendors, but obviously passing that on through the airline customers. It means from the MROs as well that the subscription services are probably quite expensive, and a lot of the smaller airlines don't want to afford them, but some do. So that makes for interesting variations in IT terms. Also, we've seen older aircraft retired, sometimes temporarily or scrapped early. I don't think I would have ever guessed that the Airbus 380 would be in such a dire state in the market. It's such a magnificent aircraft from a passenger point of view, but aircraft are being scrapped early. IT is needed to manage the parts sales afterwards, the removal of parts, the onward sailing. But if an aircraft's temporarily retired, then it may be pushed back into service at a later date when the market picks up, and sometimes suddenly. So that also requires agility on part of those managing the records and managing the digital records. But where we seem to have reached is that long haul is severely challenged at the minute. Anyone whose network is predominantly international and hubbing, really badly impacted. Wide body airline has been significantly hit, and business class has been very badly hit. And when one looks at the presentations from ISTAT and Cirium and others, most are forecasting that recovery will happen maybe 2 or 3 years downstream, although there are some grassroots of recovery in Europe. Only this morning, the travel industry, the airline businesses in the UK were canvassing the UK government for their policies to be changed in this, because they seem to be doing their best to kill the biggest airline industry in Europe. And then finally, what does this all lead to? Well, there's extensive aircraft storage. There's a camo horizon for people who are looking after aircraft in storage. Do they invest heavily in putting all these aircraft into systems like Oasis, Amos, Trax, whatever it happens to be? Or how much do they control them, or do they continue to use Excel or predominantly paper records? And then the other small matter in the industry at the minute is the vast numbers of 737 Maxes which are about to return. So it's pretty turbulent times for everybody and quite challenging. But this, in my view, is just a very simple headline summary, but there are excellent briefings that can give you the full detail of all of those online with people like iStat Learning Labs. So in terms of the COVID-19 crisis in managing the wave, I was working at the time that was in some ways quite fortunate, because I stood down as MD about 2 weeks after the aviation crisis actually hit in COVID, although there were some signs it was about to happen. So I didn't have the grim task of managing a business through that, but I was helping and advising on the side and doing a lot of the selling and marketing to the customer base. And in the immediate aftermath, the first thing was lockdown. I mean, and really locking down on costs, severe cost controls introduced by organizations like Comsoft and everybody in the industry, but also recognizing the critical importance of aviation IT and those IT systems to whatever operation would happen, because you have to remember that aviation IT isn't just supporting live aircraft operations. If the aircraft aren't flying, they still have to be kept current in record terms. If they're going to be parked for a while and then put back into service, all of that has to be monitored. And certainly businesses like Amos, Trax, Comsoft with Oasis and Rosada would have found that their systems were really critical during that initial phase. So the challenge was to make sure that revenues were coming in, to sustain minimum operations, but to be able to flex upwards. And on the other side, the airlines and the MROs all were doing the same. 15 months on, I think we're in a current status where the need for change is clearly identified. The tidal wave of digitization is clearly identified, but there isn't the cash flow to support massive, rapid change at the minute. And so I think a lot of organizations are modeling future options, plan A, plan B, plan C, but they're really looking at it from the point of view of what investment and ROI are they going to get versus the cash that they need to protect. And certainly what I saw was around late February, March, April, even into May last year in 2020, there were a significant number of evaluations of changes of the system to look at systems like Oasis, which I was involved in at the time, in competition with all the other options out there, with a desire to improving organizational efficiencies and processes and bringing around the changes that digitization produces, moving away from paper-based processes. It was a great desire, but soon they realized that they didn't have the cash flow coming in, that people had to then concentrate on maximizing cash coming in from a struggling customer base. They then also realized if they appointed someone to start looking at these projects, that they didn't have the resources or all the skill sets because people are on furlough or laid off to enact the changes. So many of those are still on hold. I think many of them will come back as the industry picks up and revenues pick up. So I'm guessing sometime later this year or early next year, there will be a tidal wave of these evaluations going on in organizations. Obviously, when you're laying off people, both on the airline and MRO side, but also in the supplier side, there's the issue of staff proficiency. And one thing I've always found, I've always put great stead in personal relationships in business and the importance of traveling and meeting people. Now, I've demonstrated, because I think I've sold 14 systems in the last 18 months, that you can still do that online with Zoom and other facilities. But I mean, I had a surprise this weekend. As the church I attend online during the crisis, there was a person there that I built up this image of that person, that they were sort of quite taciturn, fairly quiet and reserved, an excellent singer. And I actually met that person this weekend for the first time, and she was completely different to the image I built up in and seeing that person online. In fact, I go as far as to say she's quite bonkers, but in a really nice way. You can be completely exuberant and outgoing. So I think you can get quite deceived by video conferencing, and I know Taki would agree with this. I'm sure Alan, that we really want to get back to meeting people again and networking, because you find out so much when you network with people. So in terms of the future trends, I mean, a lot of these are continuing from what was already there, but things like artificial intelligence, blockchain continue to be evaluated. The point I would make about such things, drones and the remote operations, cloud versus mobility, all of these really are down to the individual organization and what risk appetite they have technically, what change management appetite they have, and what's their financial position to be able to get the return on that, because it should be driven by business value. There's little point in changing all your systems if you don't do anything better or less expensively as a result. And I think what I've certainly noticed is that we start off with this desire to make changes, to introduce new technologies, to improve remote operations and mobility, and that was critical to some during the COVID crisis. But it soon came back to core airworthiness and core records. And without those core records, all the bells and whistles that you might have from the other technologies don't really matter. And of course, there is the whole environment of regulatory approvals. The regulator is also going through the same challenge, and I doubt that the regulator is easily available at times when you want them to be, because they're going through the same grief as everybody else. So these things take careful planning. The regulators will often require parallel running. They will often want to see data processes and data redundancy, and understand the impact of potential loss of data and how to avoid all that. All these things need to be managed very, very carefully and planned very carefully. But I think we're at the point where in the future, maybe it's 6 months away, maybe it's 12 months away. I think there could be an explosion in these technology changes as the value case develops post-COVID. So in terms of managing the crisis, IT suppliers continue to offer full services throughout with reduced managing, tight cash and cost control, and that requires close account managing. And some people will have done it better than others. I think it's very true. I saw a presentation by Jonathan Hinkle, the boss of Logan at the Aviation Club, where he very clearly stated, we've had suppliers working with us for 15, 20 years. And he was amazed that some of the suppliers had not cut the airline any slack during these difficult times. And he very clearly said, we will remember you. The softer factors in dealing as a supplier with your customers through these crisis times are really, very important. And maintaining that minimum capability, but also empathy, I think is really critical. And close communication and account management is what I personally believe in. And I hope that most of the organizations in the industry have done that well. I think suppliers also have had to look at reorganisation of resources across their organisations. So if an organisation has several IT companies within its portfolio, then you look at what efficiencies can you derive from having, for example, a common support system, a hub, or a common development pool with cross-fertilisation of skills between the various businesses, whether you call that a laboratory or whatever you call it. So we've certainly seen that going across in many organisations. I'm well aware of some MROs who were quite independent, but then became part of a group, and they've been looking at best practice across the 3 or 4 MROs that are in their organisations. And it's very, very difficult to introduce sudden changes because they're going to have to operate, but they're certainly looking at it. They can see what works, what doesn't work, what needs changing, but they may not yet have decided what systems to buy that will allow them to make those changes. But there are lots of short-term things that suppliers, the customers can do in matching the demand and the requirements. Again, from the IT side, refocus your technical resources, have a clear roadmap based on the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, Brexit brought on quite a few challenges with things like customs and handling. A professional services facility, I'd certainly know that the common theme for many organizations, be they airlines, be they MROs, is that movement of data, swift movement of data is really critical to the challenges that they face, and particularly aircraft data. To properly implement a new aircraft in the system can take as many as 40 man days, and the tools to allow data imports, to clarify the data, or the services that you provide to help the customer manage that are really quite critical. And then increasingly a focus on remote implementations, because usually implementations are best done with a face-to-face presence, at least initially. But because of COVID, they've had to be done completely remotely, and it's forced people to change and to introduce robust processes as a result. From an operator's point of view, I think as people have downsized, they've had to consider subcontracting to third-party CAMO or fleet technical management services. But of course, that depends on the value case and the cost of change. There is a cost to that. So the continuing annual or monthly cost of buying in a service has to be offset by that. From the point of view of MRO IT, we really have to reassess and accelerate business change during the downtime. But as I've said, cash flow and cash positions have often slowed that up. So I've got one particular project which I've seen sitting at C-level approval, online approval, business intelligence involvement in it, legal involvement several times. And there is a hesitancy, even if people know that change they want to buy in a new system, they'd like to do it, but they want to make sure that it's going to deliver that business value downstream and an effective ROI. And they might want to see, say the CAMO team within an MRO wants a new MRO IT system to give immediate benefits, improvements in marketability, traceability, professional service they can offer against their current system. They can make that change quite quickly. But if the overall organization is looking at new base maintenance hangar software, line maintenance software, quality management aspects, and wants to make sure that an overall evaluation has that fit in with the initial decision, then you can imagine how an approval can be held up. The compelling event, which is now, is being held up by the desire to make the future system that you choose the right system. And I think also, I've learned this through business, collaboration, friendly family collaboration between suppliers and the operators is really critical. And longer term relationships, give and take, are really vital in a long-term relationship, just like in a marriage. So in terms of managing the crisis, again, from an operator's point of view, I think lots of people have been assessing competitive IT service possibilities, looking at outsourcing IT themselves, and if they don't have a big IT department, or even if they do, they say, do we need an in-house IT department? Can we work in the cloud with minimal support? Or can we have this product in the cloud so that we can focus our IT support on another more compelling business crisis within the organization? Again, greater focus on remote working, on mobile apps, web services, and some are beginning, the bigger organizations start using drones for inspection and incorporating them all. And then the other big factor with the aircraft being parked was revising the maintenance check cycles to hours ratio, the balance, and new bridging checks and return to service criteria. They've all had to be modeled and kept current using the IT systems. From an MRO point of view, a lot of it is the mirror of the airlines and some commonality, but certainly remote operations have become much more critical, I think, in the MROs, making decisions remotely without having to go back to look up records. And again, I think most of the MRO tendencies I've seen have been related to bringing together different component elements of an MRO group into best practice and charting a way forward. And clearly a lot of focus on data movement, standardization of processes, and future automation. So in terms of what market there's been available to aviation IT organizations, I think it's pretty true that I was surprised at the very high level of startup airlines coming out of the last 15 months. I think it's pretty true that investors could see that pre-COVID, there were very few aircraft available, and any aircraft you might have, if it was an A320, it might be a pretty older generation A320 with long service history. If it was a Boeing 737, you might be getting a very early NG or a classic because you couldn't get the latest aircraft. Well, the grounding of aircraft, the reduction in operations has suddenly made aircraft available at very, very low prices. And the airlines that don't have the legacy of the debt and the existing relationship with the lessor or the banks are much freer to start with new operations. And there's been a wave of startup airlines that I've seen. Similarly, airlines that were struggling before and were struggling to find competitive structures have restructured and relaunched around different bases, maybe with an AOC in a different country, but with a lower cost base and a different lease, a different relationship with lessors and owners. And they require swift action from suppliers in the market. And then there's certainly been lots of activity with freighter airlines, with just pure freighters and freighters, but also a number of airlines have moved substantially towards cargo operations to sustain revenues in the short to medium term while passenger operations are recovering. We've also seen related to that ACMI, which Oasis used to have and still does have many ACMI customers. You can imagine the effect on an ACMI operation who are here to provide short or medium term lift because the main airlines can't provide it at peak times particularly, and then suddenly the market collapses. So the ACMIs have really had to refocus and be very agile. And we've also seen significant number of CAMOs showing interest in supporting airlines or operations that are downsizing. And then I'm sure this applies to everybody in the business, a change of supplier due to dissatisfaction with the incumbent. There are a few evaluations like that going on right now, and I see that in the industry. Moving on to MROs, it might seem strange as I start talking about CAMOs in the MRO organization, but a lot of MRO organizations do have in-house CAMOs. They will often use those organizations to manage leased returned aircraft or repossessions to make sure they they're airworthy and can be onward leased or onward sold quickly. We've also seen several organizations, MROs that have camos, looking to enhance their software to reposition themselves to improve marketing. And then also MROs looking for efficiencies across the group, repeating what I said earlier. And some of those have been driven by new technologies. Certainly there's a feeling that in the future, blockchain and AI will give significant benefits to the bigger organizations. And again, the final one, changes supplier due dissatisfaction with the incumbent. So surprising amount of activity, but less so for normal operations wanting to upgrade or normal operations wanting to introduce change. The startups relaunches, camos supporting downsizing, and camos in MRO organizations looking to help with the store of the aircraft demand have been really the drivers. So in terms of business value and the change drivers, I mean, these are the questions that are being asked all the time, and I don't provide the answers to them here, just really raise them as a debate, because does the chain really drive true business value? How many times have I spoken to organizations that have IT changes and then that hasn't delivered the value case that they were wanting? Has the management got enough drive or enough energy and capacity, and have they got the staff to buy in to make these changes happen? Because without it, a stalled project is ending up going to be very, very expensive. We also see in IT that regional labor variations are a big impact. In mature markets like Europe, particularly Western Europe, the United States, Australia, where labor rates are high and labor practices are fairly heavily controlled, the labor cost is significant, and IT is a relatively easy sell. If you're selling to Africa or Southeast Asia, where labor rates are much lower, and it's regarded in various places that employing significant number of technical people is really important for the national psyche and for technical education advancement, then IT is much more of a challenge, because you're replacing labor or making labor more efficient generally. So those markets would have been extremely challenged in the current environment. Then there's the issue of managed services versus internal resources. Does the managed service give you a better value return? Does it give you better boost capabilities, or should you manage it internally? And the ROI horizon is quite important in that. And change management processes, what risk appetite do you have to it? Because if you're not prepared to manage it and you're not prepared to resource the change, it takes a long time and will end up in disaster if you don't do those things. How much parallel running is required in transition between existing business systems and older business systems? If you've got one IT system replacing a combination of 2 or 3 IT systems and extensive paper processes and lots of manual intervention, how reliable is the new system in terms of the data redundancy and the data fidelity? And that all leads to implementation timelines versus cash flow management and ROI targets. Sensible organizations, sometime around May, June, July, August of last year, realized that a lot of the suppliers were hurting. A lot of the suppliers had available people. There were probably good deals to be done on man-day rates from the suppliers, and they had available capacity they wanted to keep current. And 4 or 5 organizations, including some of the startup airlines, really seized on that moment to grab that opportunity. And the real advantage was that they got the deal done quickly because it was a compelling event to do it. And they got the implementation done quickly because a fast implementation is saving you money if it's done properly with a professional partner that knows what they're doing, particularly in bringing the data to you in a way that you can use it in a hand-in-glove approach where you share the risk, you share the resources, and you share the implementation effort. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the whole issue of regulatory approvals and resourcing. even if the organization can move quickly and the supplier can move quickly, can the regulators supply that? So all of these are change drivers and risk factors in the same breath. And it makes the whole subject of IT in the maintenance and engineering space a fascinating subject with so many variables. So this is my personal retrospective on this, and I'm not speaking on behalf of any one organization, but the conclusion I come to is that right now there are myriad variables, and while COVID and Delta variants, or Gamma variants, or whatever end up happening in the future, make that recovery uncertain, while international travel still has all the attendant risks. That lack of market clarity makes any reliable business decision a major challenge. The airlines have seen this many, many times in Europe, that they've started off with great hope that the market was recovering, and then they've had to stop. This stop-start doesn't work. Airlines like Jet2 very sensibly saying, we're not going to try and operate and lose loads of cash in the process. We won't operate until the market is ready. And they keep putting off the moment where they will launch whole-scale operations. And I can understand that because it makes a massive risk. My understanding of airline economics suggests you need that steady state, iterative operation where you can grow steadily and keeping people concurrent and proficient. So it's pretty clear that future survivors need to be agile to change. They need to be flexible to grow quickly as and when required. It will not be unusual in the next few months for customers to call the supplier and say, we need this tomorrow. Why? Because we're going into service tomorrow afternoon. I exaggerate slightly, but that is, to me, that agility, that flexibility, and that empathy to customers are really quite critical for successful operations going forward. And obviously, you've got to have the steady base, you've got to have the cash position and the technical capabilities preserved, as I said earlier, to launch that platform. So those are my thoughts, guys.
Good stuff, Nick. Thank you very again. It's great to see you bringing the expertise from your previous senior management roles into this new venture, and I'm sure it will be agile, flexible, and I'm sure you are empathetic with all of your customers, past and future. So everybody jump up, agile. We have to move, right? If we're going to be able to catch this stuff, and we all awake out there, are we? Yeah. All right. Good.
Trying to include yoga in my environment.
Flexible. So that's great, Nick. Thank you for that. I know we're getting into the late afternoon, so we just want to shake it up a little bit now, and we're going to talk to James Carroll. But before we do that, I just came across a document. I mentioned that APTN.aero has various networks for communicating with the aircraft technical people. So maybe I can just share the screen. It's not too sensitive, I don't think. So yeah, we have a WhatsApp group with aircraft lessor CTOs, and there's been some interesting discussions on that in terms of aircraft records over the last while. And this is what caught my eye. I remember having this discussion about back to birth records, and some aircraft owners looking for back to birth now on landing gears down to the nth degree, and people are asking about some standards and references for aircraft technical records. So, you know, some of you may be aware of this, some may not, but you know, there is an IATA document called Guidance Material and Best Practices for Aircraft Leases. And I just want to stop sharing that, and I'll show you what it looks like. Where are we going? There we go. So that's the document there. I believe it's free on the IATA website if you can track it down. If not, send me an email and I'll send you on a copy. But the interesting thing about it is, okay, it goes through all aspects of aircraft leasing, but it does have a very good section on, I think it's Annex 2, if you can remember correctly. Section. Yeah, Annex 2 is typical redelivery records, typical index of delivery book, engine documentation checklist, right? So let me just page down to some of that stuff. I could say it's nearly 100 pages document, but it has some very good, you can see there now, engine documentation checklist for a lease or a purchase. A very good reference material there for that. What have we got here? We've got, okay, structural repairs, and it's going back up here. Index of delivery book, you know, what are the documents required for the delivery of an aircraft according to the IATA recommendation. And there's a whole list of aircraft, typical redelivery records required when an aircraft is moving from one lessee to another lessee or return to lessor. So anyway, I thought you might be interested in that as a kind of an intro to our next section. There is some guidelines out there for aircraft records, standards, and it is actually cover back to birth as well, if I remember correctly. So if you're looking for some guidelines and guidance on that type of stuff, have a look at that IATA document. On that note, then we'll start the Q&A, and let me stop sharing that page first of all. James, you're on board with us, you are?
I am indeed, I'm here. Thanks, Alan.
Good stuff. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, before we start, JSSI and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm looking at this more from a business aviation perspective. I've worked for JSSI for the last 11 years. We are a provider of hourly cost maintenance programs, power by the hour, if you like to call it. We've got over 2,000 aircraft enrolled, everything from a Cessna Caravan right up to a BBJ or an Airbus ACJ. Mainly engines and APU, but we also cover airframes. I'm also a senior accredited appraiser with the American Society of Appraisers. So I conduct appraisals on behalf of JSSI for our partners, for our clients. So really, I just had a couple of comments on records in general, you know, how they are important for valuations, appraisals, you know, what we look for, and how they're important as well for programs. I think you can tell a lot about an aircraft, an operator, an owner by seeing how he keeps his records. You know, are they all filed away nicely? Do you turn up to do an appraisal and are there boxes everywhere that aren't labeled, records all mixed up together? You know, do they have electronic records? All these things are important. I mean, everybody knows that logbooks, for example, if you don't have engine or aircraft logbooks, your plane is, you know, worth half of what it should be at least. So I just wanted to touch on that really, and see if anybody had any questions.
So I suppose I should say that, guys, now's the time to unmute your mics if you want to contribute to the discussion here. Also, you know, there's a chat forum there as well if you want to put some questions in there. But I'll kick it off, James, maybe just by asking, in your experience, what impact does, let's say, defective records have on aircraft evaluation, and can it be resolved, or does it have a detrimental impact for the life of the aircraft?
I mean, obviously, yes, it has a big value. So some records can be rebuilt or reconstructed. Obviously, that takes a lot of effort and money because somebody's got to, you know, find stuff out, speak to manufacturers, speak to facilities, etc. So yes, big impact on value. Your plane is worth a lot less than it should be if you don't have full records, if you have gaps, or if you have missing information. It's, you know, it's one of the fundamentals. It's one of the most important things. Certainly in the business jet world as well, aircraft are mainly an emotional purchase rather than a revenue, you know, per seat per mile, you know, cost. it's very much an emotional purchase. So if somebody finds an aircraft with gaps missing, they'll walk away or discount it straight away. You know, they like to know what they're buying. I guess you could liken it in a lot lower value, but would you buy a car without a service record?
You know, what I've seen, you know, my background is in aircraft jet engines, and you know, on the commercial side there, like I was saying earlier, you know, there are no hard and fast guidelines for engine records in a lot of cases, you know. So the whole back to birth thing, for instance, has evolved over the years, and it's driven primarily by commercial considerations, you know. So the guy is looking for the on-off signature for every airline going back to day one. There is no regulatory requirement for that. And if there's one signature missing, the guy is saying, well, I'm knocking $5 grand off the price of the engine because that's missing. So how much of it is real, I mean, in terms of regulatory documentation that that's missing, and you know, are we talking about a finite list of items that make the aircraft value whole, or is it as long as a piece of string?
So I think, you know, a lot of stuff can be solved by the aircraft being enrolled on a maintenance tracking program. So whether that be, you know, whether that be CAMP, SESCOM in the business jet world, or their equivalent in the commercial world, you can tell a lot by that, because everything is tracked and kept up to date. Return to service records are very important as well. You know, if work's been done, is there a record to show what work's been done and it's been certified? You know, that's all stuff we're looking for as an appraiser when we go to value or inspect an aircraft. And you know, it can be a big job. If you walk into a room full of boxes for an aircraft that's 30 years old, and you've got, you know, bits of paper for everything, you can imagine how much stuff there is to go through. But it's important nonetheless. And
the whole area of digital records, if I have a certificate for, I don't know, a landing gear wheel here, and I have it in paper copy, and I have a PDF on my laptop over here, two identical aircraft, is the aircraft value identical in both cases? You don't have the original here, you have the original here.
I think, you know, as long as there's a record and it is a genuine certified record, I don't think it's an issue. But I think somebody touched on it earlier. I think at the moment it's only Austria that allows digital only records. So if you're looking at a digital record, there should be a paper record somewhere to back that up.
All right, but if it's gone missing, lost, stolen, in a fire, the PDF electronic version should maintain the value of the component of the aircraft to the same level as the original document.
You would hope so. And you know, if you're looking at a 30-year-old aircraft, realistically, are you going to go back 29 years and check all the records 29 years ago? You know, as long as the aircraft has been in service and flying, you know, and you've got the last few years and everything is in order, you can then, you know, pick random points in the rest of the aircraft's history and go through and just check it adds up. But realistically, would you go through absolutely everything? Depends how much time you've got, I guess.
As an appraiser, are you going to deduct marks for lack of original records?
Potentially. I mean, if you can't certify stuff, then yes, you would. Indeed.
Okay, but the certification is the current, let's say, C of A, right?
So sorry, maybe not, maybe certification or certify is a bad way. If you can't validate what you're looking at, then yes, you would be deducting.
How do you validate? I have a photocopy of a cert for I don't know, an APU that was 3 shop visits prior to this. You know, current aircraft, it's serviceable, but I don't have the original cert for that APU serviceability from three shop visits prior. Will that affect the value of the aircraft?
I would say no, because you know you're going back 3 events previous. So as long as you know everything is current and it's operating, and you've got the last shop visit, and you can see that the hours and the times and everything match up since, then I wouldn't be too worried about prior to that, as long as there is a record of, you know, when it was done, where it was done.
It's really about validating the most recent MRO event, I suppose, and having the actual documentations for the most recent event on the various components of the aircraft.
Yeah, correct. Because I mean, the industry is so regulated that, you know, it's a criminal offence to falsify records. So if the aircraft is flying appears to be in good order and there are records to back that up, then, you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to challenge that.
Okay, anybody else want to raise any issue with James or in general on aircraft records? Now's your chance, guys.
Yes, I would like to ask something if nobody else is ahead of me of the attendees. James, why is now, in the eyes, as Jan Bozak told us, you need to have original documents, and the artificial ones, copies, let's say, right? The copies are not accepted by many countries. But what is the fear? Is it fraud? Is it safety? Why on earth? What does it matter?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you know, you could apply that to everything. When you, you know, when you're trying to prove your identity to a bank, why do you have to take, you know, your real passport or your real driving license, you know, to open a bank account? I guess there is still a fear of fraud. I guess, you know, from an appraiser's point of view as well, you can take some comfort in where the aircraft is registered, and how those, you know, governing aviation authorities treat things, because obviously, you know, some authorities are better known for being more scrupulous than others. So I would look at it like that, really.
Yes, but I mean, today, the aviation practice, including all of us, whatever our profession is, you, yours, Alan, his, and all the speakers their own, it is to facilitate transactions, to make it easier. Even, you know very well, lawyers can be very pernickety, and in the old days, everything had to be written down. People had to sit in the same room, sign the contracts. These days, facility, you don't even meet your clients anymore. The signatures are made, what do you call it, digital. But apparently here it is not that far yet, right?
I think, you know, as long as you can trust the record, you can trust what you're seeing and you can validate it, then there isn't an issue. I think, you know, if it's blatantly obvious that, you know,
Yes.
Everything is signed off in the same signature, in the same pen, and all the pages look exactly the same, then, you know, maybe alarm bells would be ringing. Maybe you'd look at some other stuff. Then again, it might be the same camo or the same maintenance manager that's been looking after it, and, you know, his handwriting obviously hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think some things you have to look at. You have to step back and look at it carefully, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. As long as it is in the eyes of the beholder, it is indeed not fraudulent, and it isn't bad, and it isn't made up. But these countries then requiring still all documentations, as you say, 30 years old. I've seen it myself in my practice, a whole wall full of boxes, and nobody looks at it, basically. What happened 30 years, as you say? So I wonder why these countries then are still requiring original. I mean, isn't that really it's outdated?
Yeah. It's not just, you know, it's not just countries as well. I mean, they wouldn't lend against a 30-year-old asset, but, you know, some banks, they insist on, you know, everything, seeing everything, you know, when an appraiser is looking at it, going back to birth, like somebody mentioned. Somebody doing a pre-buy will want to see originals because they'll be looking for any reason they can to take some money off the asking price. So there's, you know, there's all kinds of different reasons, but as long as you can validate what you're seeing, the information is genuine and correct,
right?
Then you're good to go.
Right. That's the approach I would suggest. I agree with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, if you're watching out in the chat forum there, we'd like to thank Adam Yates for telling us about the IATA LLP traceability best practice document. And that link to that has been posted there by Armando Sanchez, which is great. So You can get that on the chat function there while it's up there. And I'd like to thank Sylvanami Srinivasan. Sorry if I got that pronunciation wrong, but Sylvanami was kind enough to upload the link to the IATA document that I just mentioned, the 4th edition of the aircraft leasing best practices. So there's 2 good resources for aircraft technical records for you to download and have in your toolkit, as we say, for future projects.
One final for James. James, are there major famous court cases? I'm a lawyer. That's what we all know by now, or you know by now. Are there any famous court cases about records in any country, your country, that you know of?
I'm sure there probably are, but I'm happy to state that I don't know about them.
Oh, I thought maybe you're just like, they are so famous, everybody knows, like, you know, the Blue Sky case versus Mahanair. I think the whole legal profession knows about it, and the rest of them. Oh yeah. Anyway, okay.
I'm sure there probably are. I mean, in the you know, the business jet world that I live in, you know, a lot of stuff is probably kept quiet for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I think in the commercial world, then yes, they probably are. I mean, when you look at, you know, large airlines or airlines in general going down the pan, then, you know, there must be a lot of work there in the background going through records and, you know, looking aircraft through airwork and all that.
Yeah, it's a comment in from Brian Feeblecorn, and the comment goes as follows: is a signed certified status report acceptable as a legitimate record if there is no original record available?
I guess if it's signed as certified, then, you know, I would probably accept that, but you know, that's my point of view. Other people may say different.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it myself as well, if I remember correctly, and engine life limited part status reports that we generated in the engine MRO shop over the years. We always produced fantastic looking LLP status report, but at the bottom of it, was signed by the engineering manager, signed by the engineer who prepared it, all looked very efficient, and I'd say 99% of the time is correct. But we always had a statement on the bottom of it saying, to the best of our knowledge, the data provided here is true and accurate and correct and was provided by the operator to us. So we're replicating what was given to us by the operator, and then that goes into the engine, let's say mini pack, as part of the Bible for the engine going forward. So people are taking that status report for the LLPs and the MRO documentation as gospel, but all we're doing is replicating what happened before. And it really is the last operator's sign off that is true and correct. And you move on to the next operation, and what they do different or change, then their status at that point in time, true and correct, signed. It should be good for any evaluation purposes, I would imagine.
And you do need to be careful with that from a maintenance perspective. You know, if you're saying something, you know, that has a set life limit in cycles, has hit a certain number, you need to make sure that that is accurate, because that has an impact on shop visits, on maintenance, etc. And it does amaze me how many things can get caught because, you know, people write stuff down wrong. They put a 7 instead of a 9, or they can't add up. So, you know, it's all valid stuff.
Very good. Anybody else care to comment on status reports? Brian's comments there.
It's just more on the commercial aircraft and the acceptance of digital records. Having been involved in numerous commercial aircraft transfers, everything's done digitally. You don't tend to find anyone digging through cardboard boxes anymore unless you can't find something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's generally an appraisal when you're trying to value an aircraft, certainly in the business jet world. I can't, you know, I'd hate to think the amount some of these commercial aircraft fly, how many boxes there would be and how many bits of paper. You know, if I'm looking at a Falcon 7X, you know, that's, you know, got 3,000 hours on it, I hate to think what, you know, looking at a 737 that's got 30,000 hours on it is going to be like. But yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff is electronic, as in the maintenance tracking. But still, in the business jet world, there will be a release to service document for every input, and some of that will get checked.
Excellent. Guys, we're just approaching 4:30 BST, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time, and Central European Time, it's time for dinner at 17:30, I think it is. So we're going to try and keep it, like I said, on schedule. I'm going to wrap up now if there's no final questions, and I'm going to hand it back to Taki for the final wrap up words and comments. So if you're available, Taki, to jump in there now.
Alan, thank you so much for moderating the discussion today. Really appreciate it. I think it went very well. We had great presentations, a lot of questions, really interesting stuff. A big thank you to the speakers, of course, for their contribution today with their knowledge and expertise. Really appreciate it. And of course, I'm grateful to all the sponsors for their continuous support. You will receive a copy of the recording in case you want to review this webinar. And as I said in the beginning, the 10th annual Aircraft Records Conference is scheduled for September. You will get information about this in Dublin. It will take place in Dublin, and hopefully we will meet in person finally. Thank you all for attending today. Alan, I don't know if you have any final words.
No, that was all good, Taki. Don't forget, tomorrow afternoon there is another Aeropodium event on engine leasing and management. I think you'll find that very interesting too. It's a kind of precursor also to a real live event in Dublin in September. So if you're on board tomorrow, tell your friends about it. Should be very interesting. Some lovely speakers there too. And looking forward to that myself.
Thank you very much for attending, and see you next time. See you tomorrow, I hope.
Okay, guys, good luck. Take care, and have a nice evening.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.